What if one chapter in the Bible held the key to understanding the ancient world, humanity's fall, and the battle between good and evil? In today's episode, we're going to be looking at the fall of the angels, the Nephilim, and how Genesis 6 shapes our worldview. Hello, and welcome to Glory Concealed. I'm Miles Black. In today's episode, as you already heard, we're going to be talking about Genesis 6 and the fall of the angels. But before we get started there, it's important to set the scene and look at what happened in Scripture just before that. Before the fall of the angels, of course, we had the fall of mankind in the garden. We saw the first incursion of evil into God's new perfect world and the introduction of sin into mankind. It was a curse on our bloodline that has continued up until this very day. But after mankind's fall and the events that unfolded after that, we soon saw a second incursion of evil on this world, and that was the fall of the angels. And we read about that, of course, here in Genesis 6. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of man, and they bore children. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. So there's a lot to unpack in that passage, in that beginning of the chapter, about who are the sons of God, who are the daughters of men, who are the Nephilim, the children they bore, that seemed so strange and so mysterious at first. But what we see most of all from Genesis 6 is an attack on God's redemptive plan. God was preserving his seed through Eve. But there is also an evil one who has a seed, and those two are at war and have been at war. And Genesis 6 is our first example of a major attack on that plan. So when looking at this example and this story, I think it's important to be clear about the parties involved, about the sons of God and the daughters of men. You'll find a lot of other viewpoints out there that people have in regards to what that exactly means. I'm not going to go into all those today. Any quick search online, you'll find a little bit of everything as the internet goes. But I think that the problem that a lot of Christians might have with this passage is it's a way for them to explain away the supernatural. You see that with a lot of other verses in Scripture too. But a lot of Christians will read this and not want to hear the truth, or not want to dig into any mysteries that might challenge another worldview. And that's a problem. I think Scripture is very, it's a very broad text. There are a lot of examples of lots of different literary styles. And there are certain examples, of course, in Scripture that, we can maybe be open to interpretation more when things are, purposefully hidden. But I don't think this is one of those instances. We see sons of God used in other passages throughout Scripture as well. First off, in Job 1:6. So we see here in Job where Satan is allowed to test Job, and he comes before the Lord. Starting in verse 6. Now there was a day when the sons of God, here's that term again. So, and I guess to step back and kind of address this first. Any point of Scripture where you might find something that is open to a certain interpretation or a different viewpoint, instead of going online, Wikipedia, or any other resource, The foolproof way to understand Scripture is to have Scripture interpret Scripture. If you have a question about a certain verse, you go elsewhere in Scripture and see how that same term or same word is used. And that's how we find the truth. But going back to Job. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. So here that's, we're talking about a plural, about, several entities here. And Satan also came among them. It's worth a whole other video to go into how Satan, that word, is used. Just to briefly state it, I think there's a good argument to be made that it's, Satan is a title of, of authority. Or I think actually Satan, I don't have this information in front of me right now, unfortunately, but it means the accuser. So it's almost like looking back at our last episode on the Divine Council, Satan almost has a purpose in the council as the accuser. He's the prosecution, the prosecuting attorney that's there to make a case against mankind or against God. But verse 7, the Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" And Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it." And then it goes forth from there into the story of Job. But we see there where sons of God, Satan was among the sons of God, referenced. And where were they? They were walking to and fro on the earth. They were physically in this world, but they're also obviously there before God in his council. So I think that's a great example of how sons of God is referencing divine beings, angels. Another fantastic example of sons of God is on the other end of the Bible, in Jude. We see where Jude references this very event in Genesis 6. And the angels, who did not stay within their own position of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. So we see there a clear example where these fallen angels are being held in captivity for what they did, their transgressions. Mankind has redemption through Christ. The fallen angels, well, they're not so lucky. And we see that again in 2 Peter. 2 Peter 2:4. For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment, if he did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a herald of righteousness, with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the earth of the ungodly, if by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes he condemned them to extinction, making them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly. So, of course, we see there in Scripture other examples of this Genesis 6 story, this fall of the angels. But Scripture, the Bible, is not the only reference we have for this event. What's very interesting is that we also have an account in the ancient civilization of Sumeria. They have several things that point to this same period of history. One would be the existence of deity gods called the Apkallu. These were kind of serpent or fish and half-human creatures or gods that ruled over mankind as kind of sages, wise ones, teaching things, which of course ties directly into what we see in Genesis and also what we see in the book of Enoch, both describing the same event. Sumeria also has records or tablets called the Sumerian Kings List. And then it's a record of kings that ruled over Sumer, different cities in that civilization, but not only in ancient days, but pre-flood, because the global flood is mentioned in the Kings List. And you have multiple kings listed that ruled over certain cities before the flood came. And what's also interesting with that too, I would like to note some research that I've done on my own that I have not seen anywhere else regarding the Sumerian kings list, is when you look into that, you see that they list a certain king. They say where he resided, that their kingship resided in Eridu, for example. And then they give the length of their reign. A lot of people, I think, misinterpret this. The unit that the Sumerians used was, I believe, sores. It was 3,600 units of measurement. And when they read the King's List, the units that are used on the tablets, when they're translated, I believe they're incorrectly translated as years. You'll see a lot of people talk about the Sumerian King's List and how it says that they reigned for thousands of years, 24,000 years here, 18,000 years there. When you look at the entire length of reign of all these kings, from first mention, the first king, to when they say the flood came, it's 241,200 years, I believe. That's what you'll find online on these translations. Well, as a Christian looking at that, I must say that that is false. But when I looked at it first, I thought that I was scratching my head, because it seemed, this such an advanced civilization at that time to keep such accurate records. How could they be that far off in their years? Why would there be that discrepancy there from what we see in Scripture? That it's, the Earth is not that old. The research I did on the Sumerian Kings List was I took that number, that 241,000, and instead of translating that as years, I thought, well, if it's such a large number, we'd have to use a unit that's smaller. So what about a day? And the Sumerians also were the originators of using base 60 in their measurements. That's where we get 360 degrees in a circle, because they had in their calendar 360 days in a calendar year between equinoxes. So if you take 241,200 and divide it by 360 days, you get around 670 years. And if we use the flood as a reference here, and we back up from the year of the flood, 670 years, that puts us right in the time of Jared, which is when Enoch says that the angels came down onto Mount Hermon. That also precisely lines up with when Enoch himself was taken up by God into heaven. Enoch didn't die here on earth. So I believe that's great evidence there that when the angels came down, and we can get in, I'll have other videos on the book of Enoch and that account, I'm sure, in the future. But to just touch on it briefly, when the fallen angels came down and Enoch interacted with them and then was taken up, I believe that's when the angels started their earthly reign as kings, and the corruption spread across the earth. And as I hinted at earlier, and as we saw in Genesis, they were not only evil themselves, but they bore evil children, great evil children, the men of renown, the Nephilim, the giants. So who were the Nephilim? What were they? Well, it's often translated as giants, but Nephilim in Hebrew can also mean fallen ones. It comes from the Hebrew word nephal, for Nephilim, the fallen ones. I think, obviously, some were giants. I don't think it necessarily means that all were, but the important thing is here that it was a spreading rot on the earth, the Nephilim. They were offspring of a corrupted union, one not destined by God, and that corruption spread across the entire world. When you look at the pre-flood world, around, I believe, 1,500 years or so between Adam and and the flood. When you run the numbers on that through the growth of a population over that time period, accounting for increased years, certain birth rate, what you get is honestly astounding. The world population over that time period could possibly, just based on mathematics, could have been in the billions, more than what we have as a population on the earth today. So when you have that in mind and you think about a worldwide advanced civilization, and then these corrupted giants, hungry for power, thirsty for blood, devouring anything that comes in their path, unsatiable, it begins to paint a picture of why God found it necessary to destroy it. But he didn't destroy everything, obviously. He preserved his plan. This incursion of the fallen ones, the evil ones here on earth, to thwart God's plan, well, it failed. Spoiler alert, it failed. In this cosmic battle between good and evil, good will always rise victorious. We've started studying this idea of other gods, other divine beings, the fallen angels, their corrupted demonic offspring. But they are not in control. God is in control. And he will be victorious in whatever plan he desires. So in closing, why should we care about Genesis 6? What meaning does this story have to our biblical worldview? Well, just like we saw earlier when we dove into the meaning of the sons of God, looking at this passage and understanding the story of the fall of the angels really shapes and strengthens our view of Scripture, of this cosmic warfare, the spiritual battles that are going on throughout history and today. And we see today a lot of these same patterns. We see a corruption of God's plan. We see how the forces of darkness and evil twist the righteousness and the good in this world into evil. The only difference being that Christ sits on the throne now at the right hand of the Father. And we are in the age of judgment. Christ has made the sacrifice. The day of judgment has come. Those evildoers, those fallen angels that were held in chains until the day of judgment, they have been judged, and they have been found guilty. And each and every one of us will go before the King as well. And we will also be found guilty of the fall. We are fallen, same as them. The only difference is our punishment has been paid. Christ will get down from his throne, walk before the Father, and say, "Guilty as charged. Penalty has been paid." Thank you for watching today's episode. Hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. It really helps the channel out a lot. Helps me grow this and understand what people want to hear and what I should cover next. I'm also on Spotify. If you're listening on Spotify, go ahead and give me 5 stars. It also helps the channel out a lot. You can also find me on Instagram and X at Glory Concealed. I'll be posting updates there and engaging in conversations and posting interesting things, whatever I can find. Again, thank you so much for joining me today. And remember that it's the glory of God to conceal things, but it's the glory of kings to search them out.